Anima, psyche, essence, Atman, Jiva, soul. These are all words used to describe the consciousness of a living being, the innermost self, the divine breath that flows within each organism. Almost all belief systems and religions, past and present, have a way to describe this concept, and attribute great importance to its existence. Despite this, after thousands of years, theologians, philosophers, and scientists alike have yet to find proof of its existence outside of the abstract. That is, until 1907, when a scientific paper claimed to have possibly proven not only the presence of the soul in the human body, but also its exact weight, 21.3 grams. The paper, titled Hypothesis Concerning Soul Substance Together with Experimental Evidence of the Existence of Such Substance, was published by one Duncan Macdougall, a physician from Haverhill, Massachusetts, in the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research, as well as in the medical journal Scientific American in April of 1907. Its publication sent waves through the scientific community, but its main popularity came from outside the academic sphere. You see, the New York Times had published an article in March entitled "Soul Has Weight, Physician Thinks. Dr. Macdougall of Haverhill tells of experiments at death. Lost a body recorded." Short, punchy, and ostensibly free from caveats, this headline naturally led to a sensationalist narrative, irrefutable proof of the soul's existence. Of course, the paper itself was far more grounded in its approach and conclusion, but a grounded approach never sells papers, now does it? In the paper's introduction, Macdougall explains that if the soul exists, or what he refers to as personal continuity exists after death, then it must have some physical representation in the body, unless upon life leaving the body, our common notions of consciousness are broken, which in his mind would be an unimaginable breach in the continuity of nature. It must then be possible to weigh the body before and immediately after death, and determine the difference in weight as the weight of the aforementioned soul, having left the body upon passing. Macdougall's first subject was a man dying of tuberculosis, who was selected as the disease he suffered from produced great exhaustion, and thus minimized any muscle movement or spasms on the weighing table. The patient was placed on what was described as a light framework built upon very delicately balanced platform beam scales, and monitored closely. To quote the paper, "At the end of 3 hours and 40 minutes he expired, and suddenly, coincident with death, the beam end dropped with an audible stroke hitting against the lower limiting bar, and remaining there, with no rebound. The loss was ascertained to be 3/4 of an ounce. This mysterious 3/4 of an ounce was measured while accounting for other possible losses of weight, such as evaporating moisture from breath, measured at 1/60th of an ounce per minute, as well as the subsequent voiding of the bladder and bowels, and the volume of air expelled from the lungs. In total, Macdougall repeated this process 6 times. Only the first case demonstrated the 3/4 loss perfectly coinciding with their death, while the others either lost differing amounts, larger amounts of weight over an extended period, with Macdougall unable to determine the exact time of death, or had to be disqualified entirely thanks to uncalibrated scales or outside interference. Macdougall mentions that he had repeated the experiment with 15 dogs, and had recorded no loss of weight at all upon passing. It's worth noting here that drugs were administered to the animals to keep them from wriggling, and in his own ominous words, the ideal tests on dogs would be obtained in those dying from some disease that rendered them much exhausted and incapable of struggle. It was not my fortune to get dogs dying from such sickness. Whether this means that he could only procure dogs dying from other conditions, or that he used dogs as subjects that were not dying in the first place, is up for debate. Macdougall ends his paper noting that he is aware that a large number of experiments would need to be conducted to confirm this mysterious 3/4 loss, but also stresses how significant this discovery could be for the scientific community and the world at large. Not only would it prove that the soul is a physical substance, but implies its preservation after death. The fact that it leaves the body shows that this conscious ego is separate from the physical form, and detaches once the vessel is no longer functional. The experiment garnered significant attention at the time, both from critics and supporters. Those with aligning beliefs were quick to label Macdougall as a pioneer, though the greater scientific world was not so kind. He was widely criticized for his framing of the results, as only one of his subjects produced the weight he reported, as well as his small sample size. One especially vocal critic was the physician Augustus P. Clarke, who pointed out that at the moment of death the lungs stop cooling the blood, which causes the body's temperature to rise slightly, and subsequently an increase in sweating, which could explain the slight loss of mass. In accordance with this theory, the same experiment on the canine subjects wouldn't pick this up, as dogs do not have sweat glands like humans do. Macdougall responded by insisting that since the blood is no longer circulating after death, this rise in temperature would not occur. Another skeptic, Dr. H. Twinning, went as far as to conduct similar experiments on mice, placing them in a glass retort on a scale, then introducing potassium cyanide in order to kill the subject. Twinning concluded that the small loss of weight on death was in fact due to moisture evaporating, after a follow-up test where he placed the mice in a hermetically sealed chamber, and no loss of weight was recorded after suffocation. 4 years later, in 1911, Macdougall announced that he intended on taking pictures of the soul at the moment it left the body using X-rays, succeeding if the soul was sufficiently agitated upon escaping its mortal shell. This, too, was met with a healthy amount of skepticism, and it is unknown if he was ultimately successful in this endeavor. Macdougall died in 1920. 13 years after the publishing of the paper that made him both a trailblazer to some and a pariah to many others. With his passing, the interest surrounding his subject seemed to die down too, as his experiment has never been repeated, though some have since suggested using electromagnetic detectors and other modern technologies to try and catch a fleeing soul in the act. Apparently, no institution is willing to fund the pursuit of evidence to a theory that many consider already debunked. The Macdougall experiment, or the 21-gram experiment as it has come to be known in popular culture, has a legacy that transcends its limited means. The findings, while indecisive, were enough to capture the attention of the greater scientific community and the imaginations of many who read of Macdougall's efforts. His attempts to prove the existence and physical manifestation of the soul speak to humanity's ongoing efforts to tie down the metaphysical, to find proof of that immutable spark that makes us who we are. Whether or not we will ultimately be successful is unknown, but where there is a question, there will always be those willing to go to great lengths to provide an answer.